Welcome everyone. I'm Diana Ingram. I'm the Executive Director here at Hill Center at the Old Naval Hospital. Please take a moment to check out all the fabulous things that are happening at Hill Center in our beautifully renovated Naval Hospital. This was the very first Naval Hospital to be built in Washington, D.C. So we're so thrilled that it's been turned into an arts and cultural center. Please take a moment to turn off your mobile devices. And welcome to this timely event, A Nation at Peace with Itself, the enduring legacy of John Lewis, presented in collaboration with our neighbors, Mosaic Theatre Company. And I just want to give a quick shout out to their artistic director, Reginald Douglas, who is here. If you'd raise your hand, it's great to have you here. The evening will be moderated by Dr. George Derek Musgrove and features Brenda Jones, whom the Atlantic describes as the wordsmith and whisperer to John Lewis, and of course Mosaic Theater's ever erudite and entertaining Psalm 24. Our panelists will be in conversation, and then we'll pause for audience Q&A. So we're recording this for our YouTube channel, so when we get to Q&A, please wait for the microphone. It is my honor to welcome Dr. Sharita Jacobs-Thompson, who will introduce our distinguished panel. She is a professor in the Social Sciences Department at Prince George's Community College, where she teaches courses in U.S. and African American history. Sharita is also an independent scholar and consultant in the D.C. area. She has presented at major national conferences, including the Organization of American Historians, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, the Black Studies Conference, and the Berkshire Conference of Women Historians, and has appeared on the CNN series This is Life with Lisa Ling, the C-SPAN series Lectures in American History, and provided commentary for the History Channel documentary Aftershock Beyond the Civil War. Currently, she is the co-producer and resident scholar here at Hill Center for our Benjamin Drummond Emancipation Day celebration and forum, and we are very honored to have her advice and guidance. She is a former assistant professor of Civil War era studies and African studies at Gettysburg College. And her own research focuses on Black Marylanders and their experiences during the Civil War and Reconstruction. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Sharita Thompson.
Thank you, Di. I didn't know you were going to do all that one, but thank you. So the first thing we actually want to do before we get started is to bring Mosaic's Artistic Director Reginald L. Douglas up to have a few words before we get started. So, Reginald?
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly say a big thank you to the Hill Center at Mosaic. We perform at the Atlas Performing Arts Center on 8th Street Northeast, so not too far away, and it's really exciting to have like-minded partners in the community. And so a big thank you to Marianne for being the brainchild of this event, along with Dr. Thompson. It's great to have you as partners and friends and everyone at Hill Center. And I want to acknowledge 3 important organizations that have helped make this happen. That would be the Capitol Hill Community Foundation, Humanities DC, and the DC Commission for Arts and Humanities, along with our board of directors and supporters who are making this the biggest season yet for Mosaic. And a big part of that is Young John Lewis' Prodigy of Protest, which is written by our own 2 great DC artists, Kokai, the composer, and our playwright in residence, Psalmayene 24, who you'll hear more from this evening. The production runs at the Atlas March 26th through May 3rd. We've been extended because buzz is so strong, so we encourage you to come out and witness new work here in Washington that centers our story as Americans and as DC Americans especially. To give you a taste of the piece before we dive into conversation, our playwright has generously agreed to share some of the work that our cast has been up to in rehearsal these past 2 weeks. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us. And it's my honor to introduce the playwright of Young John Lewis, Psalmayene 24.
Thank you, Reg. This excerpt that I'm about to share happens at a meeting of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and it's actually a spoken word battle between John Lewis and the revolutionary Stokely Carmichael. John Lewis goes first, and then Stokely goes after that. Microphone check 1 2. It's me, J. Lou. Finna take over the rhyme like a political coup. That's what I do, so don't get it twisted, Stokely. I was born in the South, but I'm not hokey. Gave my life to the movement, and you can quote me. Low-key, I'm a man of history, plus I spit bars like rotisserie. I'm at the forefront, not the periphery, trying to pull Negroes out of misery and hold on to progress because it's slippery. But my grip is resolute. I won't stop until I see the living proof of us getting equal rights, and that's the truth. Sick of us getting hung like strange fruit. So on to reform. My strategy is to gradually change the norm, but still come with the power of a raging storm, never lukewarm. There's strength in numbers, like bees will swarm. In fact, we must act and peacefully attack or whack and anti-black forces that are stacked against us. And not only that, if we work within the system and used Christian wisdom and speak but also listen, we'll get the justice we've been missing. And this is based off faith, not superstition. This is spiritual precision. So I refuse to burn down the house that we reside in or puncture the tires of the car that we're driving. I see us moving from barely surviving to thriving, and that's the vision behind my civil uprising. That's cute. But let me refute the argument you produced and open up your mind like a parachute. And to boot, I'll uproot your thoughts that money and loot could ever constitute a sign of progress, because no financial prospect or material object is worth economic disparity, because what the world needs is parity, not barbarity. So I stand in solidarity with the masses who need more than charity. They need food, clothing, shelter, education for their asses instead of neo-fascists trying to put them in caskets. This concept, can you grasp it? If not, I'll break it down to bite-sized bits, because I wear the crown and you got the shoe that fits. Revolution is the answer. Anything less is a wish list to Santa. Anything less is idle chit-chat and banter. Anything less is more delusional than Pollyanna. Put another way, I'll say, the day has come for us to embrace revolution, and I, for one, will do it peacefully or with the gun. It don't matter to me. As long as it's well played, I'll march, sit in, or toss hand grenades. Because it's time to destroy the paradigm of master-slave. It's time to break out of this capitalist cage. It's time to change the book, not just flip the page. It's time for you to leave the intellectual Stone Age. And when you do, you can join me in this crusade. And when you do, you won't have to fixate on getting paid. And when you do, then we can celebrate and pop champagne.
More of an in-depth introduction to everyone. Okay. Before we get started, so we have Brenda Jones here, who is a former senior presidential speechwriter in the executive office of the President of the United States for President Joseph Biden, the first African-American woman to ever hold that title. President Biden also appointed her to serve as a senior advisor to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs in the Department of Health and Human Services during his administration. Before her appointment to the White House, she was an award-winning political communicator, speechwriter, and author who worked in the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. for nearly 16 years. In 2012, she won an NAACP Image Award for her book collaboration with Lewis called Across That Bridge, Life Lessons and a Vision for Change, which hit the New York Times bestseller list in 2020. Today, she is a founder and president of the John Lewis Institute of Peace, an American domestic peace organization. Please welcome Ms. Jones. She will be in conversation with Psalm, who you've already met, and thank you so much for reading that for us today. Award-winning playwright, director, and actor. They call that a triple threat, right? Okay. He is currently the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Playwright in Resident at Mosaic Theatre. His playwriting credits include, just as you heard, Young John Lewis, Monumental Travesties, New Maple, Out of the Vineyard, Cinderella, among many others. And a few of his directing credits include Good Bones, Flow, and Passover, and Words Become Flesh. Acting credits include HBO The Wire. Oh, okay. Please help us welcome Psalm once again, everybody. And moderator for this evening is Dr. George Derek Musgrove, an associate professor of history and Africana studies at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He is the author of Rumor, Repressions, and Racial Politics, How the Harassment of Black Elected Officials Shaped Post-Civil Rights America, and the co-author with Chris Meyer Ash of Chocolate City, A History of Race and Democracy in the Nation's Capital. In 2021, he tried his hands at digital humanities, releasing Black Power, Inc. NDC, okay. Too many periods here. UMBC.edu, a web-based map covering 30 years of Black Power activism in the nation's capital. Please help us welcome Dr. Musgrove.
All right, good evening, everybody. And thank you, Sharita, for all the introductions. So I wanted to jump into it. We're going to be talking about John Lewis and two of his collaborators, folks who are shaping our understanding of him today. And just really quickly to get that conversation started, I want to just give us a little bit of background on John Lewis. I know many of you know it, but just to get everybody up to speed. So Lewis is a defining voice of the civil rights movement and of the post-civil rights period. He was the director of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from 1963 to 1966. He was, of course, the representative of SNCC at the March on Washington, one of his first famous moments. After he left the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, he was the director of the Voter Education Project, terribly important organization in actually getting African Americans onto the rolls after the Voting Rights Act is passed in 1965. He then joined the Atlanta City Council. From there, in 1986, he is elected to Congress, actually running against his old friend from SNCC, Julian Bond. And then once he's in Congress, he really becomes well known as a person who brings the story of the civil rights movement to the nation in the 1990s, the aughts, into the teens. He has a yearly trip to Selma, Alabama, which is essentially a congressional trip where members of Congress can head down to Selma to find out about the voting rights campaign, to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And then he writes a number of books that have really shaped our understanding of the civil rights movement. Of course, his autobiography, Walking with the Wind. I'm sure many of our children and grandchildren in this room have had copies of March, his trilogy, which is a young teens book on the civil rights movement. And then 2 books of essays, Across That Bridge. We're fortunate enough to have the co-author here, and Carry On. He passed away in 2020. And really, when he passed away, he had become widely known as one of the preeminent symbols of the civil rights movement in the country. So looking back at all of that, John Lewis as a hero to millions of Americans, I want to just get you all to talk about your major projects either with or about him. So Brenda, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. You worked on Representative Lewis on the book Across That Bridge, Life Lessons and Vision for Change. Can you tell us what that book is about and what you all were trying to get done with that project?
Well, that book was Congressman Lewis's idea. He said to me one day while I was working very hard at my desk, Brenda, we should write a book together. And I was stunned. I didn't say anything. And I waited for him to say that again because I couldn't believe it. And ultimately, we began looking for a publisher, and we found this lady who felt, and we felt, like I felt what we needed to have is some sort of philosophical discussion of John Lewis and his principles, because ultimately the history of the civil rights movement would pass away. And what we needed was something that distilled the meaning of all of those events into some kind of discussion that allowed people to take those principles and apply them to the problems of the future. So that's what Across That Bridge attempts to do, to use the stories of John Lewis's life to talk about what he thinks is important philosophically in terms of change and equity in America. And the publisher really wanted an accessible book, so not a book that was full of a lot of history, but something different that would engage people who maybe had no interest in reading 300 pages of history, but might read a small book about what John Lewis felt about life and his historic, the events that he lived through.
And Walking with the Wind is way more than 300 pages, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, I thought that was a door stopper. But can I ask you this before we move on to Psalm? When it came to the lessons that you all put down in that book, do you have a favorite one?
I think my favorite one is faith, because what it really talks about is something John Lewis believed, which is he believed that nonviolence and this whole idea of a nation at peace with itself was an inevitable destiny of our democracy, that if we were to survive under the same principles that we were founded under, then this idea of coming to peace, coming to grips with each other and making peace with difference had to occur. And all of his work was founded around that sensibility. So he wasn't concerned that everybody didn't receive his understanding of nonviolence. He wasn't concerned that he didn't see more progress in the time that he lived. He saw his life as a contribution to that inevitable destiny. And in my mind, that is much of why he was such a powerfully influential person, because he really embodied those principles. So I think that unshakable faith that allowed him, for example, to, I think we use the National Museum of African American History and Culture as an example of how he exemplified that. 15 years he introduced that bill to Congress, and they had forward movement, backward movement, but ultimately it happened. So I think that faith exemplifies who he was as a human being.
Thank you. Psalm, I wanted to ask you about what you wrote, the young John Lewis, Prodigy of Protest, soon to be playing at the Mosaic Theatre, if you all haven't already gotten your tickets. So can you tell us about what drew you specifically to the story of John Lewis? I mean, I think that for those of us who live here in D.C., tons of John Lewis's former comrades from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee are our neighbors and our friends, right? I think I did a count when we were doing Chocolate City. It's a solid 36 or more members of SNCC either already lived in DC or moved here after 1965. So his old buddies are everywhere, right? And so I think when a lot of us think about SNCC, the first person we think about is not necessarily John Lewis, right, because, you know, we think about our neighbors and our friends. Can you talk about what attracted you to him, and also what attracted you to the young John Lewis as opposed to, say, John Lewis the congressman?
Sure. Well, I've got to say that there's a touch of destiny involved, because I was not looking to create a story about John Lewis. The story was looking for me, apparently. So there's a gentleman by the name of Matt Torney who used to work in town at Studio Theater. He used to be the associate artistic director there, and he had just gotten a job at the theatrical outfit in Atlanta. And right after he got the job, he said, "Psalm, I want to meet with you. I have this idea." So we went out for drinks. This is when I used to drink. I stopped drinking in 2019, right before the pandemic. So we went out for drinks, and he said 3 words: "Young John Lewis. It's a musical. Do you want to write it?" And I was sort of a little confused, like, wow, like that. So that's it, this young John Lewis, and it's a musical. And he said, "Well, you know, I think we're going to explore his activist years prior to him becoming a politician." Now, embarrassingly, I did not know much about John Lewis. I knew sort of the broad strokes. Congressman had something to do with the civil rights movement, but I really didn't know the details of his life. And quite frankly, I wasn't sure if he was radical enough for my taste. I did agree, and then once I started doing research, I said, "Oh no, he's quite radical. He's just about as radical as you can get, specifically when it comes to his embracing of the philosophy of nonviolent direct action and those principles." The thing that struck me the most, and what I fell in love with the most about John Lewis and that approach to change, is this idea that not only do you not respond with violence to your attackers, but you don't have the desire to respond with violence. And then beyond that, you actually love those who are attacking you. And that idea for me is still mind-boggling, and I don't quite understand how they could actually live that and actually move toward love in that way. So that's probably the thing that really captured my imagination the most about John and his story.
Oh, well, okay. I want to follow up on this then and just jump ahead to a question I was going to ask you later, which is, you know, there's all these folks that we've latched onto in the years since the civil rights movement, depending, I think, on our needs in the moment, our political needs, our emotional needs in the moment. Moments that call for more of a black power, more assertive type of politics. Folks are focusing on Stokely Carmichael. If you know, in a moment where we wanted to sort of have a more intersectional politics, focus on someone like Bayard Rustin, right? And then, and the thing about John Lewis, I think, in all of this, is that you know, he really isn't, and we talked about this before we started. He really isn't that famous outside of Atlanta for a period after the movement, right? So he's a national figure in SNCC. March on Washington '63, Bloody Sunday 1965. He's all over the newspapers. People are talking about him. And when he does work with the Voter Education Project, when he goes to Atlanta City Council, he's still a very popular figure. You know, you look in the New York Times, you can still find his quotes, but he's far less of a popular figure. Today, folks know about John Lewis. People know the stories from March about him preaching to the chickens as a little kid, you know, sort of practicing. You know, they know the stories. Everybody knows what we mean when we say good trouble, right? And I'm curious sort of how you chose to frame him when you wrote this out, because to a lot of his colleagues, those neighbors that we talked about, he's not that radical. Like Stokely Carmichael will be like, yeah, John Lewis really isn't doing what needs to be done. At the same time, the folks at the March on Washington are like, he's way too radical, like make sure you edit his speech. And so I'm curious sort of how you managed that when you were writing this out.
Well, those were actually those sort of different faces of John, or different Johns, are things that you lean into as a dramatist. I mean, all of us here, we are there are different sides of us that are pulled out when we're with different people. When we're with our parents, right, they can trigger certain parts of our personality that are not going to be triggered when we're with our spouse or a lover or a best friend. So these are things through the relationships that John has, and we certainly see John sort of colliding with Stokely Carmichael for sure, and we see him colliding with sort of the elder statesmen of the civil rights movement as well, to show, you know, his more radical side. We see, you know, his silly side. That was something that I learned about in my research, and that was something that I really learned about through talking to people, staffers who knew him, family members. He had a mischievous sense of humor, and you know, and he loved to laugh, right? And that was a side that I didn't really know about, and that most people probably didn't know about. So again, as a theater maker, you're looking to really present a full three-dimensional human being, so you're leaning into those seemingly disparate attributes that someone has.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say, you know, this idea that there were different John Lewises he was stalwart and consistent every single day. The person that you think about, hear about, was the person he was when he came in the office. I mean, he wasn't adamantine the way you see him, you know, advocating on the floor of the House. He was very gentle, very quiet, but he was immovable in terms of his values. And I really think that these different ideas that people have about him really reflect how they view love as a source of power. I think they don't think that love is powerful, capable, has the ability to rectify the problems that we face. And because of that, and because they may be angry about what is going on, and there's a lot going on to be angry about, I think they feel they cannot reach for that understanding in the midst of their own rage or aggravation or however they feel. That, to me, is the profundity of John Lewis. He was a person who did not get angry. I never saw him express anger. I do think he was angry at times, but especially, you know, in light of everything that we now see played out on Capitol Hill, there were many things that disturbed him. But he had the discipline and the faith, the power, the understanding to hold his peace, to remember that love would be the final outcome of it all, despite all of the conflict that ensued. And I think that is why he is such a profound figure. We are at a place, and to me, why he is still progressive, even today, even though he's dead. His understanding and the understanding of King and, many of these things in the movement, they are actually progressive to the future of today, even though they're not here, because we have to get to a point, and I think part of what we're living through right now is an aspect of this, where we comprehend that in the end, if you perpetrate violence, you're going to not resolve the problem that you're concerned about, and you're going to create some new problems. Mm-hmm. So now you have two problems at least, as opposed to one, and it's not going to end up in a way that creates a workable solution. So one thing they always say about war and diplomacy is you act out war, but ultimately diplomacy is what is the outcome. You wage war until you get tired, and then you have to come up with a resolution. So what he is saying is, why go there when you know it doesn't work? Why not just start understanding that if we destroy each other, we have nothing. We have to hold together, come together, and develop some consensus and a solution. So this is why, I think I understand Stokely, and of course I grew up in D.C., which was a Black Power city. And I didn't understand all of these things until I started working with John Lewis. When I saw the way he dealt with conflict. I was going to tell this story at a different time, because I know you have other questions.
Go for it. Take over.
But one day, and we had a tough time working for him, because he demanded that you be generous, that you be polite, even the tough work on Capitol Hill, where you have to sometimes, those of you who worked here on the Hill, you have to get tough, okay? But we always had to be mindful not to get too tough, because if it got back to him, he was not gonna, he wouldn't like it, no matter what you were doing, So we had, during the time when people were advocating for abortion, my girlfriend here from Bobby Rush's office, they would, you remember, Ingrid, they would come to the Hill and, try to advocate for, against Roe v. Wade, okay? And so this guy rushed in the office, and he was very, exercised, and, we're staff, we're standing around him, and the congressman wasn't there. So we were hoping to kind of, get him to exit before Congressman Lewis came back. But Congressman Lewis walked in the door. He saw everything happening, very calm. He engaged the individual, trying to figure out what, he wanted. He listened. And then he said to that gentleman, well, you could talk to my staff if you would like to do that, but that is not the America that I want to live in. And then he went to his office, and what was fascinating about that, that man left the office so happy, even though John Lewis had said to him, look, no way you're going to get any traction from me on this, but the way he did it with, a kind of love, I don't think I can do that, made the man actually happy that he had come, even though he didn't get the answer that he was looking for. And that is the power of that kind of love. that can change the direction, the you know, the vector of an individual's energy. And John Lewis could do that.
Okay, I'm going to skip forward here. I'm going to ask one more question of you, Brenda, and then one of the two of you, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And so if you all are stewing on a question, please go ahead and queue it up, and we'll call on you in a moment. What type of boss was he?
Oh, he was a great boss for somebody like me, or even maybe for somebody like you if you had worked for him, because he loved creativity. He was not a micromanager. He felt like, go for it. If he liked your idea, he would say, go for it. Try to do it. Make it happen. The thing that was difficult about him was that he did believe in nonviolence, and he believed in personal volition. So at no time did he ever say to me, Brenda, I want this speech on my desk at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Never. He never made any direct demands about what he wanted or needed. But I was a person who would check his schedule. I just made sure that he had what he needed. So I would go to him and say, you know, Congressman, you have a speech on Monday. You know, what do you want to do? But
so you made him a nice boss.
No, he was a nice boss. The problem was he did not like to give direct criticism. And if he really didn't like something that was happening, like, then you just couldn't find him. He was just unavailable. He would, you know. So, and it was hard because if you weren't the kind of person if you were somebody who needed explicit directions, he probably was a difficult boss.
Okay, gotcha.
For a person who's creative, took initiative, he was, you know, one of the best people to work for.
And I lied to y'all just now. I'm going to ask another question of Psalm. So you mentioned that he was a cut-up, and I'd like you to both jump in on this one. What's your favorite sort of story about him being a cut-up as a young man? And then what is your favorite story about him being a cut-up as a member of Congress, Brenda?
It's such a great question. I'd never had the pleasure of meeting him, but through speaking to people who knew him, with every single person made me feel like a part of John Lewis's spirit was, you know, floating into my consciousness. But in terms of him being okay, so this is actually a story about him, his mischievous side when he was actually a little bit older, but it's still interesting to me. So in his office in Atlanta, I understand that they would always do like the birthday cakes and like a little party for staff members, right? So one person's birthday in the office came up, and for some reason they, you know, it got bypassed. They didn't create this party and the cake and everything like that. So then a staff member came up to John and said, hey, well, you know, it's so-and-so's birthday. Should we be getting something? And he said, I don't know. Why don't you ask them? And then he went to the person and said, you know, so-and-so came to me and was asking me if we should do something, but I don't know why they wouldn't just go ahead and do it. So what do you think about that? So he sort of had this sort of sense of humor that really was mischievous, and, you know, the word messy came up a couple of times, but not in a mean-spirited way, right. But in a way that, you know, that sort of has a little wink in it. So I thought that was interesting.
No, he loved to have fun. He didn't, you know, he had a serious job and he worked all the time, but he did love to have fun. The thing I think about is he loved the song Happy. and he did that video. So I mean, this was just Rachel, a person on our staff, was like, "Come on, Congressman, let's dance." And so she, turned on the thing on her phone, and then she recorded it, and it just went viral. People loved it, and he didn't have any sense. He didn't take himself so seriously that he felt like, well, I'm a member of Congress, and no, he loved that, and he had no problem with that. He loved music. He loved to dance. He loved art. He loved antiquing. He loved to go antiquing and didn't have much time to do it, but he loved doing that. So I think he was a joyful person, and he didn't take himself too seriously at all. You could make a joke on him, and if he thought it was funny, he would laugh. Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice.
And he loved sour cream donuts. I know.
Krispy Kreme?
No,
just
from
any type.
Dunkin' Donuts, I believe.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not too Southern, Dunkin' Donuts. All right. So last thing I wanted to ask y'all is, Brenda, you've been instrumental, I think, in shaping our understanding of John Lewis through not just your book with him, but also all the speeches you worked on with him over the years. Psalm, you're in the process of shaping our collective understanding of John Lewis. And again, if you don't have your tickets, go ahead and get them so that you can see the play. But can you all talk about what you hope folks will take away from the understanding of John Lewis that you all have been instrumental at this point in shaping? What you think we really need from him and from his memory in this moment? And I'll let whoever wants to go first.
Because you're going to bring us home. Yeah. So one thing, John did not make it about himself, and that's one thing that I really love about him. He always was thinking about the community. So one thing that I want people to understand is sort of how movements are sustained, and we see that in SNCC. We see how justice is provoked, and then we see how younger generations are invited into the movement, into the struggle. So I want people to really think about where we are as a nation, and use John as sort of a North Star, and use the movement that he was a part of as a blueprint that can actually help us through these troubling times that we're in.
Yes, well, I think I agree with you that I think John Lewis is a kind of North Star, because we are in the midst of a discussion, in a way, about the ineffectual nature of violence as a resolution to human problems. And it is so deeply ingrained in our society. I mean, we talk about, oh, you should kill it. You're going to kill it. You're going to slay, whatever. We think that whenever we are effective, we have to use aggression. And we are witnessing why that can be problematic. That's not to say aggression is never, usable, but for the most part, if you want to sustain a society, you have to use the power of love and peace and unity, creating, oneness with each other, or finding a way, if you have a difference, finding the way back to oneness, in the way that SNCC did. And, they struggled around these ideas until eventually they came to consensus. This is what societies can do. This is what John Lewis stood for. And I think that we have to. I was really proud of the people in Minnesota and LA and it was almost like by osmosis. They just took the principles of nonviolence and implemented them. We know in the movement they had to have nonviolence training, but somehow or the other, these ideas were written on their consciousness, and they simply did it. And I was glad that too was a part of the American ethos, and I think that's what we have to begin to evolve. We've taken violence to the nth degree. Now, what about implementing the opposite and seeing where that takes us?
From your lips to God's ears. Can I open it up to questions from the audience?
And just before you ask your question,
sure.
let me hand you a mic.
Yes.
Questions? Over here.
Sam, it could be for you or any of you. So, in this journey, would he say there was a productive role for someone like a Stokely Carmichael? Or was there always a debate about what that more revolutionary approach to change would be? Well, how did that play out?
Yeah, great question. Well, we do know that John was committed to nonviolent direct action. So, in terms of violence, I don't think he would be on board with that. But I think he was sophisticated enough to know that you must have different means of fighting for freedom, fighting for liberation. I think about sort of the different ways that some of the other organizations at the time, like the NAACP and, CORE versus like how SCLC and SNCC sort of went about things. So there was this idea of really leaning into court litigation and judicial decisions. That was like the NAACP approach, where SNCC and SCLC was more about like grassroots organizing, boots on the ground and nonviolent direct action and things like that. And when there was a tension and conflict, oftentimes people would say, we need both actually. Like both of these methods are valid. People say vote. Yes, vote. You also have to protest and sit in. Like it's not one or the other. So I think it's about knowing that the struggle is one that must hold different approaches, but violence certainly not. I think that's where the buck would stop with John.
I agree. I remember at the end of his, one day he said to me, Brenda, the longer I live, the more I feel that nonviolence is one of those immutable principles that must never be violated. I think he thought that there was a nonviolent solution to every problem, but I don't think he felt that everybody should do what he thought they should do. He believed that people had their right to make their own choices. So if they chose violence, he wouldn't participate, but he wouldn't, try to stop them from doing what they felt they should do. As a human being, though, I think that both I agree. I think both of those practices engage different people and different, outcomes that are ultimately necessary.
And just as an aside, one of I think the coolest things about the folks that were in Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is they would fight like cats and dogs back when they were 18 years old in the movement, and even when they were much older. But they had a deep love for one another. And so when Stokely Carmichael, in his last public appearance, as he was dying of cancer, came to the district for a fundraiser, John Lewis went to that fundraiser. It was right over at the Sheraton or the Marriott in Ward 3. And so there's a picture of them, embracing after all those years of struggle. And so it's kind of a beautiful coda to their relationship. Other questions? Please. What time do we stop?
I have a question maybe for Brenda. Our mayor, Muriel Bowser, stood next to John Lewis in Black Lives Matter Plaza. And today we're seeing her say things praising the president for occupying our city and so forth. I just wonder what thoughts he would have or what criticism he might address to politicians who follow, political convenience and ideology rather than values. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I don't think John Lewis had animosity toward anyone, but he really disliked Donald Trump. I remember there was a museum in Mississippi that they were opening, a civil rights museum, and Congressman Lewis had been involved in it. And then he heard that Donald Trump was coming, and he canceled his engagement. I don't think he wanted to be in proximity to those ideas. So I think, of course, as a member of Congress, as a mayor, she of course has the responsibility to engage the White House and Congress. And this is a very unusual presidency, so perhaps this ingratiating behavior is necessary. I think it's hard to say, maybe not, but so I think he would accept what she felt she needed to do, but I do think were it him, he would be adamant, I think, to the degree that, if he lost his seat or whatever, that would be fine. He would not bend to these kinds of, ideals. But I think one reason he's gone is because it's our turn now. We have to figure out, where do we stand? Are we going to be stalwart? Are we going to stand up?
Can I ask that another way, and then I'll make sure you get the mic? Because the arc of John Lewis's life is one of tremendous success, and I'm just going off your questions, tremendous success, and then watching the revolution that you put in place through the Voting Rights Act, fed through registering people in the Voter Education Project, becoming a part of an expanding Congressional Black Caucus, watching the first African-American elected president in the United States, right? Something that was unfathomable to him as a child. And then seeing much of that being undone, right? I mean, the reason that we have the John Lewis Voting Rights Bill, which is not, it's not passed into law, is because we wanted, the Democrats wanted to put his name on an effort to restore the Voting Rights Act, which the Supreme Court was slowly hacking away at. And right now, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is on the docket and could very well finish off the most important piece of legislation that he was a part of passing. Did you see him wrestling with that in the later years of his life, that his work was slowly being overthrown? And when you were writing the play, I mean, was that one of the things that you felt like you needed to push back against? So I'd love for both of you to answer that and then have the gentleman ask his question.
Well, we don't deal with John getting into politics. We stop right at the death of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And but you can't help but think about like the time that we're living in now and how that informs the piece and how that informs John. And it does sort of color how I frame the character of John. But you're saying many things, Brenda, that just that reinforces instincts about him knowing that even after he passes away, he's just one runner. He passes the baton, and then we take it and we run and we continue that struggle. So I think there's this sort of, it's like the Sweet Honey in the Rock song, those who believe in freedom must not rest until it comes. So it's that sort of spirit that is certainly in the play. And if that idea lives anywhere, it's in that sort of, engine. That's part of the fuel of the piece. This idea that we just have to keep going, and eventually, with faith, we'll get there.
Yeah, I think it was deeply disappointing to see our society reverse, but of course he didn't see much of it, and I think it was eloquent that he was missing, because he had fought his fight. He got us to this point. Now it's our job, and we had the example of a John Lewis for 80 years, a very long time. So now the question is, what are we going to do? How are we going to stand up? I think if he was here, he would, it would be very disappointing, but he's not. And I think there's good reason for that, because people would rely on him. They would feel like, well, we still have John Lewis, so we haven't lost our soul. We haven't. But with him gone, then the question is, what are we going to do?
Thank you.
I don't know if Brenda recognizes me, but I was a reporter for the Atlanta Constitution for about 30 years. I covered John when he was in Congress. Before that, Scott Shepard. Oh, yes. When he was in Congress, but before that, when he was on the city council, when he was with the Voting Education Project. I knew him about 35 years, and I'm writing something about him now myself, so I don't want to share a lot of the stories, but one of them I have to, because all those years I concluded that he was the saint that Time magazine said he was, living saint. But I did see one time when he almost lost his temper. Yes, he was my guest at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 1989. My other guest was Newt Gingrich. And they got into a discussion about whether the ad that George Bush had used was racist or not. And,
Willie Horton?
I'm sorry?
The Willie Horton?
Yeah, the Willie Horton ad. Newt asserted that it was not racist, and John listened to him for a while. They were seated side by side. It got started. John finally wasn't going to take any more of that, and he pushed back. Newt stood up, and then John stood up.
Uh-oh.
And Newt sat back down. I don't know if he was projecting love on the Newt, but...
Well, you know what? I don't know if you remember, there was a time when a member of the Georgia delegation introduced a bill to make the Voting Rights Act, to make Section 5 national, which actually was a tool to destroy it. We could just discuss that later. And I remember Congressman Lewis running down to the floor of the House of Representatives. I think, and he started pounding on the podium. You remember that?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Saying that he could not believe a member of the Georgia delegation would do something that he knew was so destructive. And, I had never seen him that upset, but the member withdrew the bill. if he ever got really angry, I would not want to be anywhere around. It
Oh,
would
no,
be-
no. I asked him about that. He said, well, Jesus drove the moneylenders out of the temple.
There you go. That's right. It was not that anger is not,
No, I know.
useful.
Right. Anyway, I love that this is happening tonight. I love hearing the stories, and it's just bringing back a lot of memories about
Well,
it.
we're looking forward to what you're going to write.
I'll tell you about it later.
Thank you.
It's not going to be a musical, though.
So we have time for one more. If you can just pass the mic down, we should be in good shape.
Could I do
and
one
go ahead.
thing? I just want to introduce one of the board members of the John Lewis Institute of Peace, Bernard Dimchuk, who is very...
Can I offer that they will be at Mosaic doing a special post-show conversation on April 2nd
Oh, perfect.
with members of SNCC honoring the enduring legacy. So thank you to Bernie and Brenda and the John Lewis Institute of Peace for coming to the theater to bring your expertise to be in conversation with the work.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all your comments. I loved listening to everything you had to say, but on your question of, now the question is, what are we going to do? What would John say? What would he tell us to do?
Well, I remember in a lot of the speeches that he made in his, whenever he went out, he always said, we were too quiet. This is long before, what's happening now. He would say, we are too quiet. People in my generation would be out in the streets. The kinds of things that are happening are not acceptable. And he would say, agitate, come up with a strategy, implement, and agitate. Do not comply, do not accept this status quo, because it's untenable, it's unworkable, it's unsustainable. And that's what he would say. I don't think he would tell us what to do, but he would say, you have to follow the leading of your conscience and do it. Don't sit still. Make it happen.
And if I can just add one last thing before we end, which is that Psalm pointed out earlier that he was not wedded to electoral politics exclusively. I think one of his last major acts that got a lot of press before he passed was that he led a sit-in on the House floor. And so here you had this melding of electoral politics and protests in the chamber of the House of Representatives. And so he would not just say, think it through, but to be inventive and not to be stuck with a single strategy. We're going to let someone who knew him and worked on the Hill with him take us home, and then I'll pass it off to Sharita.
I didn't want a question. I just had a comment. I had the pleasure of working with both Derek and Brenda on the Hill, and they are two of the smartest and most genuine people you ever want to meet. And they both have projects, so please support their projects as well. So that's all.
Thank you so much. And that is Ingrid, who also worked with
your
a
check is
legend,
in the mail.
who Bobby Rush from Chicago.
So I have to tell a quick story. So I was interested in civil rights for my dissertation, but I ended up going to Civil War Reconstruction. But my girlfriend ended up working on the Hill for Charlie Ringel, and she asked me to come to an event with her. Now, mind you, I'd been studying all of these folks and all of these folks. So we go into this big ballroom. The Temptations are playing, and I look to the side, and Congressman Lewis is over there. I couldn't believe it. It made him so human in that moment where I had elevated him beyond a human status. So that resonated when you all talked about his love of dancing. So everyone, please give this wonderful panel a round of applause. Thank you for coming out. That's all, folks.